to this meeting of the Policy and Resources Committee, and just remind you of the protocol that could you have your microphone on mute when you're not talking, and if you wish to speak, could you indicate through the chat function. So a welcome also to members of the international press with us today. I think certainly we've got David with us. So obviously David will be here until item 6, and then he will be asked to leave the meeting, so that we can continue on with the business. The meeting is being recorded, and we are currently in negotiations with various broadcasters about selling the rights to these meetings to sort of raise some money to support the council through these difficult times. But they are at an advanced stage, but we've not yet reached an agreement on that. Okay, so item 1 on the agenda is apologies, substitutions and declarations of interest. Sharon.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Sharon, we're fine.
Yeah. Sorry, apologies, I'm just not used to this. Yes, there's an apology from Councillor Wilson with Councillor Brooks substituting. And I think I've had notification of a declaration of interest from Councillor Robertson, which is, I'm just trying to check what it is. Sorry, apologies.
Sharon, I haven't got detail.
All right, so can you tell me what your declaration is then, please?
It's item 2, but it's the item 7 part of item 2, so I don't know if you want to mention it now or...
In mentioning it now, do you think you may give away some or provide information that should be taken in private? We'll wait till item 2.
Private, if that's okay then. Just wanted to note that there was a declaration.
Okay. Any other further declarations of interest? No.
Are there any other apologies? Sorry, I should have said it apart from Councillor Wilson.
I think we're all here.
Right, okay.
Everybody's here. Okay. Just before we go into the business on the agenda, I've received representation from 2 political groups on the issue of school transport. You'll recall at the previous meeting we took a decision in respect of the payments that we would make to transport providers over the period April, May and June, and indeed we had a vote on that particular matter. Now, I've been advised that members were actually, in hindsight, unclear as to what they were voting on in that respect to that matter. So I'm happy if the committee's in agreement, and Gerard tells me that it's okay. I'm happy for us to suspend standing orders to allow us to revisit that matter now. Is the committee in agreement to that? Yeah, I'm not seeing anybody indicating otherwise. Okay.
Yes.
So Gerard, can you just confirm that's appropriate for us to do that?
Yes, convener. 2/3 of members present have voted that way. It is appropriate now to suspend standing orders and to revisit that entire decision of the 2nd of June committee.
Okay, maybe could I just make a preamble, and then I'll maybe bring in Councillor Brooks first. So the original proposal that came from officers, and Alan can keep me right on that, the original proposal that came from officers was to pay 33% for the period April, May and June, having paid 100% for March. Members asked for that to be looked at again and asked for information to be provided by the transport providers. And in the interim, we agreed that a payment of 100% would be made for April. Officers subsequently reported to the last meeting having examined the financial information that they were given by the providers, and the officers' recommendation was a payment of 60%. Now, there was obviously a counter proposal for a payment of 80%. It went to a vote. It was a tied vote. I used my casting vote, and the proposal for 60% was carried. Now, I've had representations from members that they were actually confused as to what the recommendation was. In fact, there was members who thought the recommendation was the 100% in April and 60% in May and June. And given the fact that there's been that confusion on the part of members, I'm happy for us to revisit that Councillor Brooks has indicated to me that he wishes to come in the matter, and I think Councillor McElhenney wishes to come in as well. So Councillor Brooks first.
Thanks very much, convener. Yeah, I and Councillor Wilson, we both discussed it in advance, and we were under the opinion that the April, May, June payment was actually the decision that we were asked to take 14 days ago. But obviously, subsequently, we've been made aware that April was already agreed at 100%. So the challenge was then that what we would now be paying would be actually a clawback on April, and it would actually be a reduction over the quarter, April, May and June. So I would like to propose that we honour that 100% for April, and the decision last time was for 60%, so we would do a 60% payment of contract for May and June.
Okay, before I bring Councillor McElhenney in, I bring Alan in terms of that. Alan, if you could just clarify what that means in practical terms and in financial terms.
Well, what it means is that if I'm picking it up right, if I can add up the three percentages together, we agreed 60% at the last meeting for 3 months, which was 180%. It's now been proposed by Councillor Brooks that we pay 100% and then 2 lots of 60%, so that's 220%. That extra 40% would equate about £80,000 of payment to the bus contractors.
Okay, thanks, Alan. Chris, you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, and thanks to Mr Malone for the legal advice that he's provided me. I don't know, perhaps he intimated before the meeting, convener, to you that I was myself intending to move that standing orders were suspended. I just want to start with one point in that you referred to the decision of the last meeting, but the minute of that meeting doesn't actually refer to a vote taking part. So I think from a point of transparency, when votes happen at a committee meeting, they should be minuted, and it shouldn't just be minuted in a sense that the committee agreed to something without actually stating that there was a vote, and particularly when there was a casting vote. Reflecting back to the last committee, I think it is reasonable for a member to expect that when there is an item on an agenda talking about a payment such as that, which subsequently meant that something was then going to be averaged over 3 months and then money clawed back, and in actual fact for the month of May and June, bus providers would only get 40%. I don't think it's reasonable to expect that members should have came to that assumption. I think an officer should have informed members of that, and I think that the bench, the litmus test is the man on the street looking at the transparency of our minutes. I don't see how he would have came to that conclusion based on that. And obviously this week I think there's been further confusion, because over the last 2 weeks the transport providers have been under the impression that they would get 60% for the months of May and June, having already got 100% for the month of April, to then get a letter out saying that it's actually only 40% for the month of May and the month of June, which is the first time they had heard that figure, and as a member it was the first time I had heard that figure. Further, another point of clarity is, in the letter that has been sent to transport providers, that they're informed that because of how important a role they'll play in helping get schools back to work, perhaps with increased runs, for the month of July, the payment will go back to 100%. So I'm a bit unclear as to why officers, knowing that members have obviously taken this matter so serious that they wish to themselves make a political choice on the payment level, I'm a bit confused then why officers have been presumptuous to think that they can then set the payment for July. Of course, I would support the 100% payment. So I think that it's not a case of, in hindsight, members were confused. I think it's a case that actually reflecting on information that subsequently came from the meeting, I think that what went to a vote and what was approved by the committee is materially different from what's actually happened.
Okay, but can I say for my part, the decision as was implemented by officers was the decision that I understood I was voting for. So for my part, I wasn't under a misunderstanding. I don't know about Councillor Clockerty, and I don't know about Councillor Quinn, who's not obviously here today, but or Councillor Robertson. But my understanding of what was in the recommendation as what was implemented by officers. But I'll bring in Gerard in terms of the clarity in respect to the minute, and I'll bring Alan in respect of the letter that has been issued to transport providers, or Ruth. So Gerard first.
Thank you, Convener. I'm obliged to Councillor McElhenny for contacting me on this matter. I provided Councillor McElhenny with a copy of the draft minute. As you know, we're trying to get the draft minute out to George in corporate communications within a day or two, usually by the Thursday of the week of the meeting. But most certainly the minute of the 2nd of June, as Councillor McElhenny perhaps may refer, page 102 says that following a roll call vote, 3 members, and the members are specified, voted in favour of the amendment. 3 members, specify the members, voted in favour of the motion. There being an equality in voting, the convener exercised his casting votes in favour of the motion, which is then declared carried. Just wanted to clarify that point from the minutes, please, the draft minutes, convener.
Okay, thanks. Alan, could you come in?
Thank you, convener.
I'll try to raise a point of order.
Well, we'll take Alan first.
Just a point of order.
Well, Alan, let me take Alan first, Chris, and I'd like to come in to ask your point of order. Alan?
Okay, thank you, convener. I think there's 2 points on what Councillor McElhenny has said. One is about the clarity of the report. You know, I'm happy to hold up my hand if it wasn't clear to all members. I thought it was clear, but sometimes the person writing the report is maybe too close to the subject matter. I thought the recommendation was quite clear in the report. It mentioned in terms of the letter mentioning the 100% payment for July, which will be made after the schools go back in August. It isn't a case that officers take a decision which was a political decision. It's a contractual decision, which is as soon as the contractors are delivering the services that they're paid to deliver, then it goes back to the normal payment. So the 100% was simply a statement of fact. The schools are going back in the 11th of August, therefore normal payments will resume. But I'm happy to answer any further questions on that.
Okay, Chris, do you want to come in your point of order?
Just to say that that may be what the minute that Gerald had emailed me last night says, but the minute that goes on council website, which went on, which is, I must say, is actually quite difficult to navigate and find. It's not right there in your face. That minute didn't refer to there being a vote, and it didn't actually list a roll call. It just that minute of the decision that was made by the committee, it didn't actually minute the roll call outcome of the vote.
Okay, Gerard, do you want to come back on that point?
Thank you, convener. The draft minutes are prepared and they are draft. For the purposes of the committee's decision, the PNR committee's decision, followed by the PNR exec committee on the 7th of April, in order to be as transparent as possible and to be as fully accountable to the community, the instruction was that I get the minutes out in a readable format. That's where George comes. We give George the copy of the actual draft minute, and then George puts it into a readable format so that the non-informed reader of a minute can clearly see what decisions are being taken by the subcommittee. So I have to totally accept what Councillor McElhenny has said, that might not include in George's readable style the actual intricacies of the vote itself. I will certainly take that up with George. George will be listening to this just now, and we'll be able to deal with that for the future. It's our endeavour to make sure that the community as a whole see all of the readable versions as soon as possible. The draft minutes, of course, will go to the next full meeting of the council for approval. I hope Councillor McElhenny is satisfied with that.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Malone. I'm satisfied with your statement there.
Okay, thanks for that. Right, so back to the substance of the matter. So Councillor Brooks has made a proposal that the payments be 100% for April, 60% for May, and 60% for June. Does anybody wish to move anything alternative to that?
Yes, I would, convener, wish to move an amendment.
Okay, can you move your amendment, Councillor McElhenny?
Yes, thanks. I'll just perhaps speak to it briefly. As I said, I think that going by the letter that has went to the transport providers, which categorically states that they will get 100% of their payment in July due to how important a part they're going to play in getting children back to school, perhaps with extra runs come August. I don't think it then adds up that you have a recommendation from officers which was to effectively cut payments to 40% for 2 months, but then say that they should be back at 100% because it's going to be really important that we support the transport providers. So I would move an amendment that for the months of taking that in hindsight into account over the last 2 weeks now, I would move that for the months of May and June that the payment is continue to be set at 100%.
Okay. Any other member wish to come in? No, don't see anything in the chat. So Gerard, we have a motion and an amendment.
Convener, can I clarify? The motion is in Councillor Brooks' name, is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. The motion, Convener, is in Councillor Brooks' name, and it's on the basis of a 100% payment for April, 60% for May, and 60% of contracted sums for the June period. There is an amendment in Councillor McElhenney's name that would be 100% for each of those months, the April, May, and June, if that is correct, Councillor McElhenney, in terms of the substance. It would be a roll call vote. Thank you. It would be a roll call vote in terms of the motion, Councillor Brooks' motion, and the amendment, Councillor McElhenney's amendment. In terms of the roll call, Convener, may I proceed?
Yes, please.
The votes, please. Motion or amendment, Councillor Alfeld.
You're on mute, Ronnie.
Sorry, apologies. Amendment.
Councillor Brooks, amendment or motion?
Motion.
Thank you. Councillor Clockerty.
Motion.
Councillor McCabe.
Motion.
Councillor McElhenney.
Amendment.
And Councillor Robertson.
Amendment.
Convener, I have 3 votes for the amendment, being Councillors Alfeld, McElhenney and Robertson. I have 3 votes for the motion, being Councillor Brooks, Councillor Clockerty and yourself. I ask for a casting vote, Convener.
My casting vote's for the motion.
The casting vote is for the motion. I declare the motion carried, 100% plus 60% May and 60% June. Thank you, Convener.
Okay, thanks. Okay, could we now move on to item 2 in the agenda? The intention, as previously, is to ask the Chief Executive to make some introductory remarks, and then we'll go through each of the main sections of the report. So, Aubrey?
Okay, Convener, everybody hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. This report provides members, as usual, with the update on actions by officers taken over the period in terms of the COVID-19 emergency, and covers a number of other issues which we picked up in the main body of the report. There are various updates within Section 5 in terms of health and social care, education and environment and regeneration. I would refer members to the recommendations in terms of noting obviously what's in the report, noting that further reports will take place as we move forward. And also note in paragraphs 5.7 to 5.9 the proposals for the reopening of the schools. 3.4 agrees the continuation of support for pupils and receipt of free school meals. And that's with a net cost of £264,000. And also, finally, Convener, at paragraph 3.5, grants delegate authority to the Corporate Director for Environment Regeneration Resources to grant the Council's consent as landowner for relevant applications that may be considered appropriate in consultation with other officers, which is identified further in the report. Colleagues are here to answer any questions.
Okay, thanks, Aubrey. So, intention is to go through, as I said, the main sections of the report. So, starting from paragraph 5.5 and 5.6, HSCP. Are there any questions on that? I don't see any in the chat. Are there any questions? No. Okay, that takes us on to section on education and communities, 5.7 to 5.12. Chris, you've indicated a couple of questions, I think. Certainly one question in that section.
Yeah, sorry, and also I've had the order around the wrong way because I had looked ahead to testing, but I didn't obviously realise that I could have made the point under HSCP testing, so whatever you would like me to do.
Okay, well, we'll bring you in 5.6.
Yeah, so just fine. It's just a general point for information on 5.6, the COVID assessment centre. Obviously, yourself included, the chief executive, myself, and others, we were heavily lobbying for more testing to carry out for most parts of April and May, and we had been basically told that it wasn't possible to use the Greenock Health Centre assessment centre for a testing facility. But obviously, 5.6 relates to I think it's 5.28. Later on, that we've now made the decision to close the Port Glasgow drive-through testing facility to carry out testing at the assessment centre at Greenock Health Centre. So I was just wanting to get a better understanding for officers why they now believe that it's possible and practical to carry out testing at Greenock Health Centre, whereas a month ago the position was that no, it wouldn't be appropriate to do that.
Okay, Louise, you want to come in?
Through yourself, convener. Supposing a month ago we were in a different position in relation to the number of assessments that were being undertaken. At that time, we were taking relation to the assessment slots. So there was the 20 slots that we had. We quite frequently went over 50%, 60%, and then the next day we could have 2 people. So it was a kind of roller coaster in relation to the demand line in relation to that. And then meanwhile, in the period of time since we've had the health and social care portal, we've tested over 800 staff. And we didn't really know how it was going to go in relation to care homes, the care home staffing and where they were going to be tested. Now we've had notification that they're going to be tested through the social care portal. So actually we've got capacity to bring those 2 things together. I think it's a good news story. In other parts of the system, they've been able to stand down the assessment centres altogether. I was keen to continue to have some kind of assessment centre, although I think, for instance, I have a little dashboard, there's only 2 people at it today, in case we need to step it up. So just for good planning in the future, so I'm keen to keep it here. But equally, at the same time, the number of people who were testing in the Health and Social Care Partnership had went down quite considerably. So it's opportunistic for us to put those 2 things together and make sure that we reduce some of the costs in relation to that. I hope that clarifies.
Yeah, could I just follow up on that, convener?
Of course you can, Chris, yeah.
Thanks very much, Louise. That's very useful. So it kind of was leading to the point I was wanting to make was I'm trying to harmonise that. You had used the language there of other places standing down. I'm trying to harmonise that with the continued level of risk that we assess. For example, I see Councillor Brooks is going to ask a question on schools. So we're continuing to risk assess that basically we need to have certain levels of physical distancing in place, etc. We're still not opening up non-essential shops. It's still impacting material across the council and all the services we deliver. I'm just curious as to how that actually then harmonises with the whole kind of let's stand down a wee bit, the assessment centre, let's kind of stand down testing to an extent, and that, well, surely the more behaviours you introduce, the more bridges, as the First Minister refers to all the time, that you introduce, you would think then, well, there's a risk that we might see more community transmission. So why would we then decide, well, if that is the case, we would stand down within certain areas?
Okay, Louise?
Just through yourself, convener, just to provide some reassurance on it. In other partnerships and other parts of GJC, they've stopped their assessment centres in their totality. I'm quite keen for us, even though, for instance, today we only had 2 people at our assessment centre, to keep an assessment centre so that actually if we need to stand it back up, we have all the staff who are already there, and it means that we're well prepared. I think 6 weeks ago we didn't know where we were going to test all the care home staff, the care home staff. And so that's quite important because there's about 700 odd staff in there that require to be tested. And so if we were testing them through our own portal, that would have kept our portal very busy, particularly because we knew repeat testing was coming. But actually now that they've been tested through the social care portal provided by the Scottish Government, it does mean there's some capacity. We will still have dedicated testing and assessment teams. So if we need to step up to provide some reassurance, we should be able to step up in Inverclyde relatively easily. and it means that we've had some staff who, for instance, in health visiting or mental health, who were working in our assessment and testing centres, and they've gone back to their jobs and they've started to step up. We've started to step up some of the face-to-face contact, and we've used some additional staff from bank in order to put them on temporary contracts so that we've got people who are there more permanently to do our assessment and testing.
Okay. Any other questions on 5.5, 5.6? No, I don't see any. Right. So moving on to the education section, just sort of, I suppose, taking them in numerical order. Graham, you got a question on 5.7?
Yeah, thanks very much, convener. Just at this stage, I'd like to thank all the officers for answering the questions by email from the group. That's been helpful and hopefully speeds up the meeting for the convener. But on education, it very much is a moving feast. Many representations from parents we've had. We've also seen in the national media some changes in Scottish Government. And I just wanted to ask Ruth, how comfortable are you that we have got the correct solution? And are any of the changes that potentially will come from Scottish Government, will we be caught short? Can we cope with the changes if the Scottish Government asks us to? I think this is a bigger ask, and I understand that opening schools must be a massive challenge, or it is a massive challenge for your team. But nevertheless, it's a very important challenge. And is things going in the right direction with the potential changes from the Scottish Government?
Ruth, you want to come in?
Through you, convener, I'm confident we've got as strong a model as possible, given the guidance in place. Our model is for 50% of pupils to be in a school at any one time. It's one of the strongest models in the country, and it also matches the rest of the Regional Improvement Collaborative across the West. I think there has been a lot of noise recently about the models as we return, and we will continue to follow that guidance. But at the moment, with following the guidance and following the expectations, yes, the model's strong and it can be adapted. There will be compromises at any point for that, and one of those will be cost. Another might be the teacher's capacity, you know, to do both face-to-face and online teaching. Everything in this model is a compromise, but I'm confident that we can be adaptable and take it forward or scale it up or down as we need to. I'm also confident mostly about the social distancing and the 2 meters, and actually that we're able to do this safely and to follow the guidance as well.
Okay, Graham, you want to come back in?
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, very helpful. You made the comment of 50%. That's not quite accurate for primary schools, as they're not coming in 50%, that's secondary schools only. Some people, constituents are asking, why can't we use the Wednesday's teaching time? If we have to clean and re-prepare the building, why can't we do that in the evening, even night shift, pay the cleaners extra? A number of challenges that we could, if we chose, to obviously increase the education for primary school children. And I'm not sure that comments from the opposition are noise.
Okay. My comment about the 50% of pupils being in at one time was accurate. It's that they will be in for 40% of the working week. The reason around that is, I think you will have seen a third model, and you will have seen different councils have come up with a third of primary schools can be in at one time. Now we have to address why that might be the case. If we look at the social distancing rules, most primary classrooms can get in between 10 and 12 pupils. Now, if you're looking at a class of 33, a third is 10 and 12. What we've done is we've actually expanded our school estate by using gym halls and spare classrooms, libraries, to make sure that we can get 50% of our pupils in, but basically by giving more teachers across the school. What that means is there is a trade-off between what's be able to be delivered for reduced class contact time, and every teacher is entitled to reduced class contact time. What I would say is that by using those teachers, we're able to make the maximum efficiency of our teachers and meet the 50% of pupils being in for 40% of the time. You'll see two models emerging. It's either a third, which is 1 day a week, or 2 days a week at 50% with a day in between. It's not necessarily about the ability to clean, it's about the ability to maximise the efficiency of your staffing, but it does keep the cohorts together. And apologies, I didn't mean to say any comments from the opposition have been noise. I meant all the emails and the requests for information that they were receiving over the last 2 days.
I mean, I certainly think there's been a lot of noise at a national level, justified noise potentially as well. But the reality is, Graham, there's no a blank cheque here. We're operating in extremely difficult financial circumstances, and the model that officers have come up with is going to cost us a significant amount of money. I think the figure we were quoted in the briefing, and this is probably just a rough estimate at this point in time, was an extra £400,000 a month on top of what we pay. So that's extra. So the government have clearly indicated in response to challenges from the press that some of the plans that they've, in a sense, been made aware of from other councils is not sufficient in terms of face-to-face learning time. So our proposal will obviously be looked at by the government, and if the government comes back to us and says, we would like to see if you can increase the amount of face-to-face time, for example, in terms of primary schools, I'm sure officers will have a costed plan ready that we can put to the government if they're going to provide us with extra funding. So it's a fair challenge, and I think we need to face that challenge. And as clearly as we've seen over the last few days, there's huge uncertainty about what's going to happen here. And there is a degree of confusion, I think, caused by a bit of mixed messaging at a national level, but we just need to deal with it. But I think our officers are working incredibly hard to try and maximise the amount of face-to-face learning within the constraints of the 2 metre social distancing. Now, if that was to change, that's a game changer, no doubt about it. If the government's to come up with extra money, then we can obviously potentially marginally increase what we can do. But this is a huge, huge, huge challenge for every school and every council across the country. And I'm confident our officers are working to the best of their ability to meet that challenge. Okay. Graham, did you want to come in and cleaning? Or was it Chris? Chris, you want to come in and cleaning?
Yes, thanks. It was just on the back of a good point that was raised. So obviously we agreed to quite a substantial resource, something like £500,000 extra for cleaning of school establishments. So I'm just wondering, is there going to be feedback to members on the PPP schools on what COVID assessments they've carried out? Because I would assume then that they're going to be carrying out extra cleaning requirements themselves to get the schools up to the same standard. And will that then have an adverse financial impact on the council that we would need to pay those providers even more than we already do?
Ruth?
My understanding is not. When we looked at the cleaning efficiencies a few years ago, the SEMP model already had an enhanced cleaning efficiency, and we're working with them. But my understanding is there won't be at this point an extra cost, but we're still working through all the requests of them.
Okay, right. I'm trying to keep myself in order here. Chris, 511, I think's your next one.
Yes, thanks, convener. Questions for Mr. Puckrin. Obviously, the First Minister announced today the headline announcement is, I'm not going to actually go into the detail, just the headline is school meals will continue over the summer holidays. So I was just to get clarity on whether you had looked at the financial implications that would be Inverclyde. I think that the £12 million, would that get us like £300,000? So what impact will that make to the figures that you've suggested in 5.12?
Alan, I'll answer that, but you can answer that. Okay, you answer it, Alan.
Well, the questions for...
No, I know, but I'd already asked Alan the question earlier, so I've got the information at my fingertips, Chris, but I'll let Alan give you the information since that's who you've asked the question to.
It's very democratic of you.
I know. I'm democratic to a fault. Alan?
Thank you, Convener. I'll just make sure it's the answer. Between the two sums of money that we got, there was one of announced of 15 million for school meals, as far as I understand, and one of 12.6 million potentially for other food insecurity. That would come to about £500,000 based on what our share was of the original 30 million. The school meals element of that would be around about £280,000, and obviously based on the net costs that are quoted in paragraph 5.12 would mean that that would be sufficient funding to meet the free school meal payment of £25 a fortnight up to the end of August, on the basis that early years would meet 40,000 and a £66,000 underspend, as outlined in 5.12, would be put towards that as well.
Far be it for me to correct the Chief Financial Officer, Chris, but it's actually the other way about. It's 12.6 million for school meals and 15 million for other food insecurity. So it's roughly 230,000 for free school meals. You want to come back in, Chris?
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Just obviously to remind you that, as you maybe once said yourself, that wise people only ask questions they already know the answers to.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm sure you had a briefing from the SNP in advance of the First Minister's statement. But I mean, it does raise the issue that if we're getting circa £230,000 for free school meals from the government, it means potentially we'll have more money to look at other initiatives going forward. Remember, we've agreed for a report to come in August to the PNR to look at potentially how we can further support families. And this whole issue is not going to go away on the 28th of August, and we're going to continue to have challenges around how we actually provide school meals over during the sort of blended period. So I think it's something we'll have to look again at as part of our strategy. But as I say, we're going to have a report in August anyway. Okay, any other questions in terms of the education section, Stephen?
Just before we move on the schools agenda, I had submitted a whole range of questions to Ruth, who has very kindly answered them all. So I really don't know whether it's worthwhile going over them again, because we do have a significant number of answers here. But I would have to say, just before we move on, that there were a couple of responses that I think it would be beneficial if we tried to get some clarification on. I know we've covered some of this before, but if I summarise, we asked questions about alternative facilities, that is to say, not school facilities, to carry out some teaching. And we asked again about other use of facilities. Ruth had told us that we think that some childcare may be carried out in church halls. But the one that really threw us a lot was a statement that said the parents will become co-educators for 3 days a week under the new world that we're moving into. So I just wondered if we wanted to comment on that.
Okay, Ruth?
So I was asked the question about parents becoming co-educators and what that would in all reality look like. So long have we tried to involve parents in family learning and co-education. So actually this is not really a new initiative. Family learning and parents understanding the curriculum and being able to speak to their children about learning, it has long been on the agenda. And that's part of our Attainment Challenge fund. What I would say is that in Education Scotland have done some work to support parents. There are websites with Scotland Learns and also Parents Zone to look at aspects to help parents support their children. There is a compromise. If teachers are teaching more time, then they will have less time to do the online learning that we're looking at, the type of online learning we're looking at the moment. So there is a delicate balance to have between the face-to-face commitment and also the online.
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. Through you, Stephen. I mean, how confident are you, Ruth, that parents will be able to become, in inverted commas, co-educators for 3 days a week? I mean, will we be able to measure that, for example?
Ruth?
I don't suppose we'll ever be able to measure it. What we do know is actually parental involvement in their own child's learning can make up to 10% of the difference in a child's attainment. So we know that children who fare better in our schools, if they have got parental involvement, will tend to fare better academically. So there is research to say that that interest does make a difference. What I would also say is that schools will be, if you think of the normal pace of learning, there's the exposition, the explanation, there's the actual implementation, the trying things, and then there's the feedback. Where we would expect our teachers to be looking at is a lot of the exposition stage, and also the feedback to learners stage, and actually similar to how we would do homework, doing the implementation part in the middle. We're also, and you'll see later on in the agenda, we're looking at a platform. So actually teachers, we can make recordings of teachers doing the exposition stage as well. So that actually will help pupils to revisit any learning or any parts they didn't understand. Now, if we think about not only just the recovery phase, but bouncing forward, actually that ability to video lessons will be to the benefit of all learners going forward, even when we manage to get them back into school 100%.
And are we confident about digital platforms? Are we confident that we have enough kind of digital platforms and expertise out there on basically homeschooling?
So there will be a blended model. So there are different types. So there's the digital platforms, but there's also the good old-fashioned pencil and paper. And what we've tended to find over the course of the lockdown is that actually parents have come to us and have asked, and pupils themselves have come to ask for us for increasingly worksheet type materials to be left with the schools. That's because too much digital input is beginning to be repetitive for the pupils. So actually, the blend of all the three, we're trying as much as we can to get the infrastructure for Wi-Fi and also people to access the learning as well.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, as that is done in the education and community section, I don't see any other questions. Okay, can we go on to environment, regeneration and resources? I know I've got one from Chris from earlier on. I've got one myself. Anybody else got a question in terms of environment, regeneration and resources?
Yeah, and I think, again, we put that to Scott earlier.
Okay, are you happy with the response you've received, Ronnie?
I haven't had a response from Scott on that particular one. It's 528.
Okay, but do you want to answer your question, Ronnie?
Yeah, it was basically a question about outdoor eating and drinking, adjacent to licensed premises. And I had actually spoken with the licensed solicitor, with Jerry, and with some others about this. So basically, I know that we're in the process of forming some kind of guidance, if you like, to go out there. We've had quite a lot of inquiries from licensed premises and indeed other premises who may be quite keen to utilise outside space if the Scottish Government announced on Thursday that outdoor eating and drinking will be encouraged or allowed under phase 2. And if premises don't have customised, if you like, beer gardens or anything of that nature, then would it be possible for them to utilise areas which they don't necessarily own to allow that to happen? And I realise that we're moving into new ground, but when I read the kind of draft of this kind of proposal, it seemed to me to be pretty reasonable. That if we did give any permissions, then it would be on a temporary basis, it would be 28 days. It would still require some kind of planning assent, and you would need to consult with the roads and so on. But certainly, I think that it's something that we should look closely at. And in my note to Scott, I suggested that perhaps it might be a good idea if we had some sort of subcommittee to assess the number of requests we've got, because I personally have got some, and I know that some other elected members have also got them. Basically, it's a chance, I think, to reinflate a bit the local economy, to keep people in employment, and basically to give some incentives to premises owners.
Okay, I know Chris is going to come in, wants to come in at this point, and I'll bring him in a second before I bring Scott in, Rory. But just as Chris has indicated in the chat function, Rory, what we're trying to do is use the chat function to indicate when you want to ask a question. And I know this technology is particularly new to you. You know, some of us have obviously been using it for a while longer. If you could maybe just indicate when you want to ask a question in the chat function. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I'll do that if I can get the technology to work. But
right. No, I understand it. Understand. No. So what I'll do, Ron, we know your question. I'm going to bring Scott in a minute, but I'm going to bring Chris in first because he's
a more general point, Stephen. Just before you do that, again, we're down to the question of if we're posing pre-questions and we're getting responses, do we want to actually raise them here at this forum?
Well, what I would say to you, Ronnie, is if you ask a question and you're satisfied with the answer, I don't see a need to raise it at this forum. I've asked a number of questions of officers. I'm satisfied. I'm not feeling the need to ask them here. So it's your own judgment call. So your own judgment call in terms of that. But I would say if you're happy with the answer and you don't feel it's something that needs to be necessarily in the public domain, then that's fine. But it's your own judgment. But I'll bring in Chris first before I bring Scott in. Chris?
Yeah, thanks, convener. I know that Martin McNabb had been working in the background on this, because I think it was maybe well over a month ago that I had spoken with Martin and yourself as well about perhaps looking into this issue. And I think that maybe about 2-3 weeks ago now, when it was highlighted in the Greenock Telegraph, I know that it certainly generated a lot of interest from a lot of businesses. I think it certainly would make a difference. Obviously, it's just like schools, it's like everything else. Obviously, how you manage it safely will be the main issue. Simple issues such as toilets and how you actually serve people. So I don't think it's an enviable task to be the person that gets the authority delegated to them, because there may be some places that people think are suitable that maybe are not. But the specific question was to Scott, Mr. Allen, was, as I say, there are obvious areas, maybe like squares and larger pavements, but will you be considering perhaps of traffic reduced at the weekends, perhaps impeding onto roads, maybe extending, because there's been a pot of money that was received to extend pavements, and I don't think we've seen any report yet on how that money is going to be spent to maybe make pavements wider for social distance, physical distancing, etc. So would you consider any approach from, say, a restaurant or a cafe that was on a road that you think it's suitable, that you could then barrier the road, to narrow the road, and in doing so widen the pavement so that people can enjoy, I think it's been referred to as al fresco eating, on some of the streets in Inverclyde, as well as the square areas, the obvious ones being Clyde Square, Cathcart Square, etc.
Okay, Scott.
Thank you, convener. If I could answer the second question first, and I'll maybe bring Gail in, if that's all right on that one. We have been looking at how we could extend the area by looking at parts of the public road, and this is something that is being encouraged. Gail, could you cover some of that for us, please?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. This is something that we're looking at with our national colleagues in other local authorities, as well as Transport and Scottish Government and Sustrans. We are looking at opportunities to redesignate areas of the carriageways, whether there's areas that can be used as zones that are suitable to be able to safely have areas of outdoor dining. If we have a strategic overview of where these zones can be, it allows us to meet with the businesses in those areas, or discuss with the businesses in those areas a joined up, formalised approach to how they would have toilet facilities, how they'll cross the footways, how we ensure that we're not encroaching upon pedestrian areas, but also having any interaction with the running carriageway. So at the moment, that's what we are looking at in conjunction with the Spaces for People funding, which our partnership with Sustrans, they're very keen that we do look at the use of our adopted road network to accommodate these activities.
Okay, Scott, you want to come back in and the other issues that from the interest raised?
Thank you, Convener. On the other issue about a potential subcommittee, Mr. Malone submitted a draft policy to the licensing board members, which sets out how the licensing board might approach applications for the use of outdoor space, which I think is helpful. But the direction that officers are recommending is that the delegation in respect of land comes to myself, unless there's a problem. If there's a recommendation for refusal, it would go back to the committee. But if it's a straight approval of the use of land, we feel that the quickest and most efficient way to deal with that would be through officers. I don't know, Jerry, if you would want to comment further on that.
Convener?
Yeah, Jerry, come on.
Convener, yes, the draft policy that's been sent to the licensing board members, Councillor Alfeld, of course, has contributed to that. Is very much focused on what the licensing provisions can actually be made to do. There's no real law in terms of this matter. It's a matter of using the existing legislation in order to produce the result that aids economic recovery, safeguards the licensing trade, and has respect for neighbours and residents in the vicinity of outdoor catering, outdoor drinking. We are suggesting the use of a condition where the premises will be used where permitted and where allowed in terms of the legislation, the guidance that might be issued by the Scottish Government in relation to the COVID emergency. We've made mention of the planning consent, building warrant, roads consent, and perhaps we're now talking about the landowner's consent, but I just wanted to say that in the interest of a pragmatic and hopefully helpful solution, we know that people just can't click their fingers and get planning permission. There's got to be a period of grace in order to allow licence holders, applicants to make planning applications. And for that reason, we're accepting the application for an occasional drinks licence on the basis of the assurance, the evidence that a planning application has been submitted, and it's then going to be allowed a period of 28 days to get through the planning process. That will be challenging, but at least it's something that tries to address the issues. Scott has referred to the point about landowners' consent. Councillor Alfeld has made this point. It's not necessarily ground within the licence holder's control. There might be an indoor, but so to speak, outdoor facility within the confines, the curtilage of a licensed premises. There might be space nearby, which might be in the ownership or control of another person. There might be space ground nearby in the control or ownership of the council. This is provided for the council. So if the council is approached in terms of any landowner's consent, there's an expedited way to deal with it. Exactly as Scott says, that if it's an approval, it goes to Scott. However, it's to be recommended for refusal, it would have to come to the committee. I hope that's satisfactory, Convener.
Okay, thanks for that. I'll bring Chris back in and then I'll bring Graham in.
Thanks, Convener. There was what I just come back in, and just one of the points that then got up on about the licensing board had been asked for views on this, but I think, as Mr Malone says, it's quite unprecedented this, how it crosses between planning and licensing and just general community issues. So I think as a ward member, I think it would maybe be suitable for anybody to express their view. And one of the things I wouldn't like to see at this juncture would be the permission for vertical drinking to be allowed on in any extension that's granted. But just on the point of member involvement, we obviously, it's economic recovery this issue comes under, and we've got the member sounding board, which we've now appointed members onto. So would this be something that you would envisage that the best way for members to continue to be involved in the process is using the member recovery sounding board?
Okay, Scott, want to come in?
I think certainly the member sounding board would be one way. one of a number of issues which will be discussed at the Member Sounding Board, and of course the licensing committee in respect of the specific proposals.
Okay. Graham, you want to come in?
Thanks very much, Convener. It was just a question for Gail. You talked about collaboration throughout Scotland. In the last 12 to 24 months, we've been closing roads down to protect pedestrians from potential terrorist attacks, putting up bollards to ensure that vehicles can't enter into pedestrian areas. This sounds like a complete reverse of that. At a Scottish level, maybe not in Inverclyde, or why not, but at a Scottish level, are we taking into consideration the danger of a terrorist issue would cause if we increase street eating and dining?
Gail?
I'm not aware of any discussion there's been on that in relation to terrorist activity. The discussion that we've had is more in relation to vehicles being in the proximity to people sitting, and what kind of barriers would be suitable to protect people that are sitting in adjacent to the road. So I guess it would be similar in the fact if a vehicle was driven accidentally or on purpose towards people sitting on the road. We're talking about that and how do we protect people, but not necessarily in relation to a terrorist attack, but it's something we can discuss.
Okay. Okay, any other questions in terms of environment regeneration resources before I raise an issue? I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Okay, right, paragraph 521, Save the Inchgreen Dock campaign. Obviously, the report refers to the letter to the First Minister, and that copy that's attached. The campaign are specifically asking us as a council, I suppose, to endorse that letter to the First Minister and to write to the First Minister with that endorsement. So any views on that anybody wants to offer? Chris?
Yes, thanks, Convener. I think that everybody, maybe one or two exceptions, are well signed up to the aims that the campaign's trying to achieve. I think it might be worthwhile just actually targeting a letter a wee bit more effectively, perhaps to Fiona Hislop, who's the economy brief now, because obviously I think the First Minister, time-wise, I don't think we would be able to get too much of a time commitment at the moment, but I think on the back of, and maybe Scott could update his a future committee, still some legacy issues on the back of Ferguson's renationalisation, the wider footprint that was promised at that point, how the nationalisation is going to then expand into other marine leisure opportunities. So I think that there's a wider economic debate on Inchgreen and how that's going to actually be used as a strategic asset as part of the nationalisation of Ferguson's. So I think perhaps we should seek to arrange a meeting, maybe even yourself as council leader, with the economy secretary at some point in the future to have them come to Inverclyde when it's safe to do so, or whether it's online, to actually discuss this. Because at the moment we seem to just be sending sentimental letters saying that we support things instead of actually trying to sit people down and get a plan. Because you remember before Derek Mackay resigned that there was a new Clyde strategy was released at the lighthouses in Glasgow, and we were absolutely part of that strategy, but we've not really heard much of that since for obvious reasons. So I think it would maybe be wiser to get a wider piece of work and what the economic opportunities are for Inverclyde, particularly in relation to Inchgreen, and then try and set that up through the economy secretary to see how we could take it forward.
I mean, I think that's a reasonable suggestion. I think best thing is to get a report. I know certainly in terms of the sort of vision for the Clyde that I've asked questions and asked for reports at a Glasgow City region level, and we've had an initial report on the sort of planning aspect of it, but actually what does it mean in practice? I think civil servants are still trying to work that through as well, but I think it would be useful to get that overview report. I mean, I personally don't have an issue with us writing to the First Minister endorsing the letter from the campaign. But I know there's been a number of letters sent to the First Minister recently on various issues by local elected politicians, and I'm not aware of responses to those letters at this point in time. So it might be we write to the First Minister with a copy to the Economy Secretary, but I'm more than happy for us to have a report from Scott as well, whether it be to this committee or to the Environment Regeneration Committee after the summer recess. So are we happy to pen a letter to the First Minister with a copy to the Economy Secretary just endorsing that?
I have a question. Yeah, thanks very much, Convener. Yeah, in principle, yes. I will say, having seen the letter, I don't see an issue. But my challenge is, and I'm aware, Scott and Jerry, they were in public session, that Peel Port, who own Endstream Dive Dock, have an order book. And what I wouldn't want to do is for us to have any detrimental effect on the clients of Peel Port for Inchgreen or any potential clients. So I'm not sure if Scott can say anything in public session about the order book for Inchgreen.
Well, yeah, I'm sure he can speak to the generality, but I absolutely 100% agree with you that we wouldn't want to do anything as a council which would have a detrimental impact in attracting work into Inverclyde. So absolutely. Scott, you want to come in?
Thank you, Convener. I will have to speak in generalities here to say that Peel Ports are preparing for another contract to go into the dry dock now that the floating pontoon is out, and that I think has been delayed because of COVID. I could give a bit more detail of that in private session if that would be of assistance.
Okay. Ronnie, you want to come in? You're on mute, Ronnie.
Sorry, it's covered.
It's covered, okay. Right, okay, well, when we get into private session, if anybody wants more information, I think I could be dealt with out with the meeting. Scott could provide some further detail to members. Are we okay with that being dealt with outside the meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I'll see that. Right, moving on to the section on testing. We've obviously covered some issues around that. Anybody get any question? 6.2, Ronnie, you've got a question.
Yeah, please. Just a very quick question. Do we know what the numbers are of tests carried out in the mobile unit? Well, basically at the waterfront and at St Andrews.
Okay. Louise?
Self-convener, no, we don't get information about the number of tests that go through the mobile unit. It's a UK government initiative, and we only get information in relation to the stuff that goes through the Scottish portals.
Ronnie, you want to come back in?
Yeah, okay. I'm a bit confused with that one. I could be wrong here, but I thought that Stuart McMillan asked a question of Jean Freeman at Parliament last Tuesday or last week sometime on that very question and got some kind of answer. It could well be, as Louise said, it might have been the UK position, I don't know. And I just kind of overheard it, but I'm not sure.
Okay, Louise?
Through yourself, convener, I think that was in relation to the ECOS system, and it was to do with the tracing tool. So I think the question was, how does it impact the portals and the mobile testing units, the UK government testing units? How do you do the trace? And there is an ECOS, what's called an ECOS, an electronic communication of surveillance in Scotland. And so there is some information, but it's not, we don't get information as a local authority or a local HSCP about the amount of tests.
Okay.
Chris, you want to come in 6.9?
Yes, and it's actually quite pertinent to that point. Maybe instead of asking questions, could officers speak to that section and explain it better? And if I've still got any questions, I'll come in.
Okay, Louise.
Sorry, convener, I'm just trying to think about how I can say it in a different way. I don't know if I can explain it any better.
But I'll maybe make a point. So you just obviously in answering Ronnie, so you don't get the data for the mobile test unit. So if you don't get the data from the mobile test unit, I'm just wondering then. So there was concerns at the last committee, which generated this, obviously, and that we weren't getting that data, and then there was a positive test that wasn't getting alerted to us. So if there is a positive, so if someone gets tested up at St Andrew's Church at the moment, and that goes to the Lighthouse in Glasgow, and it's a positive test, contact tracing then starts.
Yes.
So do we, as a local authority, does the HSCP get informed of that, so that you're aware that there has been a positive test in Inverclyde, that person is then being contact traced? Surely that can't be happening without our knowledge.
It certainly doesn't come into the HSCP. I don't know if Martin's on the call and it comes into the council.
Sorry, I'm happy to get in on that. So this was confirmed by the consultant public health medicine and at the health board, who are running the Test and Protect for the health board for Glasgow and Clyde area. He has confirmed there was some concern at the last committee that the health board weren't getting the results in order to enable them to pursue the test and trace. They are now getting those results, and we confirmed that at a teleconference last week that they see those. However, that information doesn't come to the local authority. So we may have provided a couple of VHOs to take part in Test and Protect, but we don't see any of the data. The data stays with the health board. So they're getting it from the Lighthouse labs, but we don't see it as a local authority at all, and neither does the HSCP.
Just follow up on that, convener.
Of course you can, Chris.
Yeah, I just think that's still fundamentally flawed, because it's test the person, find out they're positive, into isolation. Well, they should have been in isolation anyway, but then we trace the contacts. But surely institutions and organisations need to be contacts as well, because without being over dramatic, talk about a school, for example. So if one of the positive tests is somebody that's been in one of our schools, surely we've got a role in that we should be informed, so that we can assist in the contacting and tracing, instead of leaving it to an individual basis, which is it does sound a lot like an honesty box still at the moment. Whereas if we were told as a council that there has been a positive test in one of your establishments, surely that would then greater assist us to support public health.
Martin?
So through you, convener, at the moment, one of the difficulties is that, as you'll probably have seen, well, it's not a difficulty, it's a good thing, there have been relatively low numbers of positive tests over the last couple of weeks, which is excellent. But what that means is that there's not been a lot of tracing to go on, and actually most people don't have a lot of contacts, because you're required to actually be in close proximity to somebody for 10 minutes or more in order to be classified as a contact. Now, if we're all practicing physical distancing, most of us should never be anyone other than really immediate family at this point. So there hasn't been that many contacts. What will happen as we go on is that it's possible that as schools restart, as we have more people in workplaces, that does become the case. And where there are cases that involve potential institutions or workplaces, then that they would be escalated to a kind of senior team at the health board, who would then no doubt involve us in that. So say it was in one of our schools, I think we would be in discussion with the health board about assisting with any precautions that need to be made. But at the moment, the numbers are so low that it's really just, for example, if I were to test positive, then chances are it would really just be my wife would be the close contact, and that would be the end of it. And I think a lot of people are in the same boat. So we're not really getting outbreaks as such. And that probably reflects the fact that the R number is below 1, because people are generally practicing social distancing. Obviously, where people aren't practicing social distancing, but they're with strangers, at the moment, there's no way of knowing who those contacts are. So that's a further difficulty. But at the moment, I think the problem is that there's such limited data that there's not a great deal you can say about it. But I would expect that we would be involved if there was an outbreak centred on an institution.
Okay, Elizabeth, you want to come in?
Thanks. It's really just kind of on the back of what Martin said. It's good if we've got a low number because there are low numbers of cases, but it's not good if it's because people aren't going for appropriate testing or aren't coming forward appropriately, and we don't really have a sense of that. It would be my thought. unless anybody wants to argue with me on it or to tell me something different. So I don't know how we kind of square that off and say that that's okay because the numbers are low, because I'm not quite sure that I'm happy about that as such. But also, if we do have an outbreak when things do ramp up, we have schools open, we have more places of business open, then how do we know that we're going to be agile enough to do the testing and the tracing and the contacting when we've not been doing it in a robust enough level, to the point where our system might actually make things worse because we've not tested it well enough? These are my concerns.
Martin?
I think that's a very hard one to answer, and it is a problem. It's a problem that so we provided a couple of members of staff potentially to this process, but the first couple of weeks they haven't been needed at all. They're only just coming in now simply because of these low numbers. So yes, it's very difficult. So what is a good thing might actually be a weakness, but it's impossible to know.
Okay. I mean, I think it is important we keep an overview of this area and keep this as a standing section in this report, and try and get as much data as we can and press for that. We might get told no, but I think we should continue to press for as much data as we can get. Okay, any other questions in this section? No? Okay, moving on to section 7, workforce issues. Any questions on that section?
Convener, if I could start, it was Councillor Robertson. If I've incorrectly noted this, apologies for the interruption, but it was item 2, part 7. I think Councillor Robertson was making a declaration of interest.
Oh, it's item 7 related to item 2, the private item.
Apologies. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Right. Any questions on section 7? No, I don't see any. Section 8. Are you want to come in, Ronnie?
No, it's okay.
Put yourself on mute, please. Okay. And then the appendices. Anything on 60 in the appendix? No? Okay. Thanks for that. Right, that takes us on to item 3, updating early learning and childcare expansion, and Linda's going to speak to that.
Thank you. Through you, Convener. Today's report on the ELC expansion plan provides information in 2 key areas, namely the underspend in the 1920 early learning and childcare revenue budget and the implementation of the expansion programme for 2021. The first section of the report provides members with the information on the underspend of £2.4 million in the ELC revenue budget. Details of this underspend are contained in section 5.3 of the report. The most significant area of underspend, as you'll see, is in salary costs. This equates to £1.7 million and is due to the delays in major infrastructure developments at Rainbow Family Centre, Blackfield Children's Centre, St Joseph's Nursery Class and Craigmarlock School. Delays and difficulties in recruiting or retaining ELC graduates and teachers also contributed to this underspend. Section 5.5 of the report outlines a proposal to make best use of this underspend to support both the COVID-19 response and the implementation of the expansion programme for session 2021. Moving on from the underspend takes us to section 6 of the report, which focuses on the delivery of 1140 hours of ELC in session 2021. Yeah, you will be aware that Scottish Government revoked the legislation for 1140 hours in April of this year due to the COVID-19 pandemic. After careful consideration of this change, it has been concluded that 1140-hour placements can be allocated to all eligible children in Inverclyde for session 2021. Moving on to between section 7 and section 12 of the report provides information in each of the geographical areas across Inverclyde. This was the format the Education and Communities Committee asked that information to be shared in previous reports. In summary of these sections, 1140 hours can be delivered in all areas across the council. There will be a small reduction in the availability of wraparound places, the private places that parents top up their entitlement with, and restrictions on some establishments and patterns of attendance. We spoke at Education Committee before about the choices of patterns, because most parents are looking for the 93 attendance pattern, which won't be available. It's important to note that children will not access this full entitlement until the COVID-19 restrictions for early learning and childcare are lifted. Like primary and secondary schools, early years will be subject to reduced capacity when services return in August. Section 14 of the report outlines the very good progress that's been made with recruitment. We had a significant recruitment drive in February, which was very successful and has meant that almost all staff have been recruited and will be in post for the start of the new school term on the 11th of August. Finally, a comment on private and voluntary providers. We have an increased number of private and voluntary providers, both in terms of nursery settings and childminders, who are on track to become funded providers as of August. Many of these providers were already delivering extended hours, so that will continue for them, and all others will start delivering as of August 2020. Finally, committee are asked to approve the allocation of the 2019-20 underspend as detailed at section 5 of the report, subject to agreement by the Scottish Government. Committee are also asked to note that a detailed review of the 2020-21 ELC revenue budget has been undertaken and will be reported to the September Education and Communities Committee. And finally, note the changes to the expansion plan and that further changes may be required in response to Scottish Government guidance on 1140 hours and or COVID-19. Happy to take any questions.
I'm on mute. I accidentally put myself on mute. Chris, you indicated a question earlier in the meeting, so I'll bring you in and then I'll bring Ronnie in.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, convener. Linda, it's just slightly an overlap between your remit and the Education Recovery Programme. Just looking for clarity on how it works for families who've got children that have got an entitlement to early years, but they've also got children in school in terms of attending school on the same day and co-location of facilities, etc.
Through you, convener. Thank you, Councillor McElhaney. We're working extremely hard to match the model across ELC and primary. The guidance for ELC was only published yesterday, so we're playing catch up with the primary school guidance. But the model as it stands, that Ruth explained earlier, will be the same model that we adopt in ELC, with a bit of a difference in terms of what happens on Wednesdays. This will allow us to match provision for siblings across early years and primary, and that process is underway just now.
Thank you.
Ronnie, you got a question on 2.1?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. I had a number of questions, a couple of questions, but the big one was about the underspend, but I think Linda has really explained that pretty well. On the 1140 hours, obviously the government have the vote, the plan to do that if necessary. But my question is, are we capable of having 1140 hours after COVID's over? And my third question to you, convener, would be, how many additional staff have we recruited on that to handle that situation?
Okay, Linda.
Through you, convener. I'm confident we have got all the evidence, Councillor Alfield, that indicates that we absolutely can deliver 1140 once the COVID-19 restrictions are in place, are removed. We've had to develop some contingencies, as I've already mentioned, projects like Larkfield and Rainbow and Craigmarlock, depending on how quickly the construction industry gets back. These projects will be delayed, but we have managed with colleagues from Care Inspectorate to put contingencies in place. In terms of your second question in relation to exact numbers, I would have to come back with that, Ronnie. We have recruited over 100 staff But in terms of an exact amount, I would want to double check that in terms of the different types of posts and relay that back to you.
Okay, Linda, thanks very much.
Okay, you maybe just circulate a note to the committee, Linda, in terms of that information.
Yes.
Okay, I don't see any other questions on this report. So we're happy to agree to recommendations?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Right, that takes us on to item 4, education ICT infrastructure and pupil access to ICT from home. I think Ruth's going to lead off in this report.
Yes. Okay, if I take you through the recommendations in 3.1 and perhaps expand on each of the recommendations as they come up. So looking at first of all, the connectivity, and that seems to be the breadth of the broadband on Wi-Fi. And what we're asking for is to improve connectivity because we will have increased use from our schools outwards of ICT. So the first two recommendations are asking us to increase the infrastructure. The connectivity is a one-size-fits-all. You have to do the whole estate or not at all. And we're asking for £130,000 to improve the connectivity, and that will be funded from an underspend in pupil equity funding. The second recommendation is looking at unallocated attainment challenge, and that's looking at the Wi-Fi infrastructure in 5 out of the 6 secondary schools, and that includes Craigmarlock School. And we're asking for £264,000 to do that. This links in with recommendation 3, where we are prioritising secondary schools because of the senior phase. We have to prioritise the money, and the 84,000 will be for the Wi-Fi improvements in the secondary phase, and that is specifically to enable our pupils who are undertaking certificated courses to best access the Wi-Fi. There is a question asked of me linked to number 3. Why is this not the primary schools as well? Members may remember about 3 or 4 years ago, we did some work when the pupil equity funding first came on stream to look at Wi-Fi funding, and actually we put a supported package in for all of the schools if they wished to increase their Wi-Fi, and a number of primary schools did this. The secondaries didn't because the cost tended to be prohibitive against the PEF spend, but actually a number of the primary schools opted to do this. So we have to look at the equity of fairness of that if we were to do the primary schools, but we also have to look at the fact that without this bottomless pit of money, we have to look at where we would go first, and our recommendation to you is to go with the secondary schools first. Going to recommendation 4, we have managed through different infrastructure upgrades to increase the Wi-Fi in all of our early learning centres apart from 1, and this is asking for £13,000 to update Rainbow. Recommendation 5 is looking at the purchase of 250 laptops for allocation to the service to support learning, and we've put this on a prioritised basis. Councillor Arfeld asked earlier about the possibilities of people accessing remote learning, and we are aware, despite some money being put in from the Communities Fund and also some possible money coming through the Connect Fund, of pupils who still may not have access to laptops. So our proposal, and we have to start with a broad set of principles and entitlements, is to look at 250 laptops for those who are getting free school meals in the senior phase. Proposal number 6 is looking at the digital platform I referred to earlier, which is providing literally a platform for teachers to be able to record lessons so people can view them again and again. I've already discussed the merits of that, but that will not only help a blended learning approach, but actually help a normal learning approach as we move forward. Recommendation 7 is looking at, we need a policy. If we're providing laptops out to pupils, we need to have some sort of rules about this. The report says that the laptops would remain the property of the council, and that there would be a user agreement in place, but we can provide further information to the Policy Resources Committee, and also, sorry, to the Education and Communities Committee in September. Happy to take any questions, but I also am aware that Alan and Norman are online, and they'll be happy to be able to deal with more of the technical details than I can.
Okay, I've got a number of questions. Maybe if I could come in first. Obviously, you've identified the funding required for these various initiatives, but we know the Scottish Government has allocated £30 million to support sort of digital infrastructure within schools. They've ordered 25,000 Chromebooks at a cost of £9 million, and there's a balance of 21 million as well yet to be sort of distributed. So we're assuming that whole 30 million is going to be allocated across councils soon, but there's not been an agreement yet, I think, on how it's going to be allocated. So if we get a share, or we should get a share of that 30 million, is that going to supplement what we're doing, or in a sense replace what we're doing? So what's the intention on that?
Our intention would be that it would supplement, not replace what we're doing. There are issues around the Chromebooks and compatibility. We completed a survey that was in on Friday to look at the requirements across the estate, but the idea would be that that would supplement the laptops, not replace.
Okay. Chris has got a number of questions. I've got Elizabeth wants to come in, and Ronnie. So Chris first.
Yeah, thanks, convener. Starting at 6.2, Ruth. So, I mean, I think it's great the work that Belleville Garden Project's doing, but that section of the report there seems apparent that we've to an extent relied on Belleville Garden Project for a lot of our data. I would have hoped that we would have a really solid knowledge base ourselves of our children through free school meals, universal credit, etc. That we wouldn't have to have relied on a charity basically to take the lead to carry out the work that they've already carried out. On 6.6, just it's maybe more for Alan. I've been told that £100,000 for 250 laptops, that's £400 a laptop. I've been told that's quite expensive. So maybe that's something you could comment on. On 6.8, I think this is a very strange section, which is particularly odd considering the reports about trying to use connectivity to have a more equitable approach for children. So the last sentence in that report says that we'll get the families who are getting laptops because of the poverty and the deprivation, we'll get them to put them on their own household insurance because it'd be too costly for the council. Well, 26% of households in Scotland don't have home insurance, and that's a national figure. So obviously it would be fair to extrapolate that upwards for Inverclyde if we know we've got issues of deprivation. So I think that's, I don't like that at all, if I'm being honest with you, that we'd be asking, well, I think reading it verbatim, it's actually quite silly that we're asking pupils to do that, because to be pedantic, pupils obviously don't have home insurance. But to ask pupils and their families to put something they don't even own on their home insurance, I don't see that making sense. And also it doesn't actually then cover the point that there is a likelihood that there are large amounts of households in Inverclyde that don't have home insurance. On 7.1, the use of PEF, I guess in generality, using money to help have a more equitable approach is a good thing. But just I suppose the point on the principles of PEF, and that this funding's not targeted to target the children that we're trying to target through attainment. It's going to be spent across the whole school estate, so everyone will benefit. So it's that argument that Councillor Clotterty's previously made about, well, how does that then narrow the gap between the poorest and the richest children? Of this is something that would benefit everyone across the entire estate. So you could argue that everyone's attainment would improve.
Okay, Ruth, I'll let you lead off on these questions.
Okay, so if I come in on 6.2, the Belleville Garden project, remember the third sector have access to community funding and outside funding sources that councils necessarily can't. So it's good the partnership we have with lots of third sector organisations. What I would say is it was that we worked in partnership with Belleville Garden. It wasn't that they came and had the data and told us what we needed. It was more of Norman and Belleville working together to say here's where we could do this. We also work in partnership with Bernardo's as well to do a very similar project. 6 point. I'll let Alan come in about the costs. But I suspect that this is to do with the fact that these are managed laptops and they're linking into our system, and that we have to have some sort of maintenance around them, which will probably increase that. 6.8, the insurance. Yes, that is a difficult one. I absolutely get the sensitivities around that. And it's very difficult for us to know as we take our first steps into a managed process like this, what the expectations will be. And I know other councils also consider this. For instance, would you just take a loss amount which might outweigh the insurance? What will it actually cost under our agreement to insure it? But we do know also that some people do have household insurance, and actually, if that's possible, then we would be exploring the public pound to actually to explore that. This everyone will benefit. The 7.1. Yes, I understand that point as well. And there are aspects of all attainment challenge and pupil equity funding that will benefit learners. Even our classes on pedagogy of teaching will benefit everybody. What I would say, especially around the IT, is that the most disengaged learners tend to quite like IT, and also the ability to use IT away from a busy classroom if people are perhaps distressed or learning in smaller groups. We have seen that be used very, very well, especially when people are putting support in and if we've got people on laptops. So actually increasing the infrastructure has enabled us to reach it, from what I've seen, the harder to reach pupils who are struggling in the classroom. I'll hand over to Alan to come in on the
just before I bring Alan in and the cost of a laptop. But in terms of the utilisation of the funding that comes under the attainment challenge, which includes PEF, the government specifically wrote to councils to say that councils had flexibility in the use of that funding because the government recognises these are not normal times. And in terms of the whole attempt to get schools back to some sort of face-to-face learning and supporting the blended model, they are giving effectively schools and authorities flexibility over that funding. They're removing the constraints, that, shall we say, that apply in that funding. Alan, do you want to come in on the cost of a laptop?
Yes, through you, convener. We deliberately didn't choose the cheapest laptop available to us through the Scottish Government contracts. We recognised that students and learners would need equipment that would last them through several years of learning. So it wasn't particularly the cheapest. It's the same model that we use across the estate within the schools. So they'll be using the same laptops at home as they would use in the classroom. Additionally, we've built in an element for some learners who don't have home access that we can include upgrading the laptops to have 4G connectivity. And we've also included within the 100,000 an element to provide headsets and microphones for some students as well, which would allow them an element of privacy and an element of if perhaps they were in a noisy household, etc., they could use these the headsets and microphones to interact with the teachers. So we deliberately didn't go for the cheapest option available to us. We wanted to get the best quality and the best all-round package for the students involved.
Okay, Ruth, just back to the insurance question. Can you assure us that no family will be required to take out extra insurance or add to the costs of their insurance to insure these laptops. It will only be where they can be insured under existing policies and not any additional financial impact.
Yes.
Yeah, so what happens to families that don't have insurance?
We would
need to look at insurance, presumably.
So nearly a third of the country don't have home insurance, and that's across the whole country. So it's obvious to assume that where you've got deprivation, you've got an even higher percentage of people that don't have home insurance. So I don't think it should just be something that we say, well, we'll go and have a look at it. It's something that perhaps we should have something concrete what we're going to do, because it's a reality we're going to be confronted with. Never mind, obviously, the additional electricity costs and the cost of Wi-Fi for families at home, which the report doesn't actually touch upon.
Ruth, do you want to come in on those points?
I think that we're looking to, if they haven't got Wi-Fi, then we'll supply Wi-Fi with the computer. So we'll either supply a dongle, or as Alan's just said, the computer will have 4G capacity. We will look at the insurance. Yes, it's something we just haven't managed to get an answer for yet. And the report says we'll bring something back about the terms and conditions and the policy for lending these out to the Education Committee.
Okay, Elizabeth.
Thank you. It's kind of touching on one of the last points that Chris mentioned there. My comment is really just about if we want to make sure that children have got the best, and I would have said this at the briefing the other day, by the way, but I had a complete train wreck of an experience at the briefing, so apologies for that. If we really do want to make sure that kids have got the best opportunity to do a significant chunk of their learning for potentially quite a long time at home on a much more formal basis, then there are really quite fundamental elements that I think we are partially trying to cover here with connectivity and kit, if we're trying to cover those two things. But even more fundamentally are things like the will and the support and the ability and the confidence of adults who are with them at home to engage with this, which I think is not necessarily always going to be as we would like it across our population. The actual physical learning environment that some kids are going to be in, which I guess Alan McDonald has kind of addressed by having headsets and things if there's a noisy environment or whatever. But there are wider environmental concerns that I think we need to, as a system, somehow we need to be thinking about, that isn't just about paying for kit and paying for connectivity, but there's the issue of electricity. Juicing a laptop is a costly business if you're on a power card. And we're going to be asking families with maybe multiple kids, multiple pieces of kit to be doing that, and it's just another financial burden that they're going to have to face. And again, as a system, I think we need to at least bear that in mind, that not everybody's going to be in the position of being able to pay a quarterly electricity bill at the end of every quarter. You know, that's not people's reality, particularly people that we're talking about. So I think there are other factors that we do need to take into account if we really want to make this a truly accessible and inclusive and successful experience for a significant chunk of learning for a number of the kids in our community. My question, there might be comments on my comments, but the question I had was about recommendation 6, and it's really just about ClickView, and really why do we need a platform? Why do we need to pay £20,000 for a platform for our teachers to generate and disseminate content? There are lots of platforms available just now. I'm not asking that from a curmudgeonly point of view, it's really just from we are spending lots of money, and I want to make sure that when we are spending money, it's because we absolutely have to do it, rather than because somebody's told us that we do.
Okay, just before I bring Ruth and potentially Norman in, if Ruth wants to bring Norman in, that just in terms of the point about electricity, so that we don't lose it, can we pick that up in terms of the report we're looking at for August, as how we support families going forward with these sort of potential additional costs? But Ruth and potentially Norman, do you want to respond to the specific question and the generality of how we support families in learning?
So Norman, do you want to come in on this?
Yes, I'm more than happy to. We are looking at a system that doesn't only allow us to post our own videos, but actually provides a bank of resources across all curriculum areas. So the ClickView is a platform which is already developing very fast just now. It's got hundreds of different topic areas, some to do with employability, environmental issues. It's subject specific as well. So what we've got is a bank of resources which teachers can readily link children to at home. It has teaching materials that also go with it. So in terms of delivering that blended model of learning, we've got the opportunity for staff in classrooms to be concentrating on the children that are involved with them, but at the same time, the children will have been set other tasks to do at home, and this really expands that whole variety of it. We are working with our West Partnership colleagues just now, and we're looking at ways if we can collaborate to bring together a whole series of resources. We're exploring different avenues, the delivery of live masterclasses, as well as the delivery of pre-recorded training and resources for staff as well as pupils. So it's a really powerful new addition to the range of applications we've already got.
So, I'm on mute. Ruth, do you want to pick up the general question about how we support home learning?
Yes, it will be this, as I alluded to earlier, this blended model. Also, I think what Councillor Robertson is referring to is the motivation to do that as well, and actually the support and people helping keep pupils motivated in a variety of circumstances. And actually, we're seeing that across the board, I would have to say. As we go towards the summer holidays, I think pupils are missing the teacher interaction and feedback, and pupils from across the wider spectrum and across the age range are actually saying they can't face going online anymore. So I think we have to look at that teacher feedback, because online is not the be all and end all for learning. The different types of motivation, we're absolutely aware of that. And if we go back to pre-COVID days, when we were putting Wi-Fi into the community centres and CLD, we're really trying to look at the computers around that we could use and getting pupils online around those places. Actually, that might be part of our solution for people who can't get the quiet at home, and we absolutely know that. They can come into the community centres. Also, once the libraries are open, that might be a quieter place for people to study. Our secondaries are also very aware of those pupils, especially in the senior phase, as we open up, who will require that extra support. And I know that they are beginning to put in as part of their planning of little bits of catch-up time that teachers can also do to have a one-to-one check-in, or possibly get pupils to come in for just extra parts of the school day if possible. So that's what we're putting in, just to keep that motivation up. But I absolutely understand the problem, because three or 4 months without anybody interacting with you teaching and relying on parents, as Councillor Arfeld went, that can be a difficult journey for some people.
Okay, Ronnie, you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you. Just a very quick question, I think. In terms of remote learning currently, are we aware of the levels of access and engagement across individual schools at the moment?
So all of the schools have done surveys as to the engagement, and we've got to remember that one way of seeing engagement is whether or not people have logged on to the programs, but that doesn't necessarily mean they've engaged with the learning. It means that they've actually logged on. So yes, we are aware that the teachers are tracking it, and if people haven't been engaging, then they've tried to do that with follow-up with phone calls. Again, we have to be quite careful about this, because actually some parents have said that we've had feedback that's created some stress for pupils as well. and actually sometimes it's been reading a book or a paper and pencil method pupils have preferred. And that's why about 3 or 4 weeks ago, we were actually doing a lot of work around giving out jotters and papers and pencils, because that's the feedback we were getting from the pupils themselves. So it is that blended mix. Yes, schools are aware, and they will be aware of pupils who haven't accessed at all.
Okay, thanks, Ruth. Have you any idea roughly of what kind of percentage of pupils are actually using the IT system?
I would struggle to give an actual percentage of that, because people will use it in different ways and actually at different times as well. There's people we had who were very engaged to begin with, but now have disengaged. It would be nigh impossible to give a percentage of that. What I can say is when we did a survey prior to COVID, and we asked our senior pupils who had access to Wi-Fi, it was over 90% of our senior pupils said they had access to Wi-Fi and actually were quite content with their digital capabilities. So we have to look at the whole picture when we take this forward.
Are you confident we're maximising as much as we can?
Well, you always want to do more. I'm confident we're maximising as much as we possibly can, and people have changing circumstances, Councillor Arthell. People who had who maybe have run out of data halfway through a month on their contracts as well. You know, it's an ever-changing landscape, I would have to say. But we're doing everything we can, certainly on the remote access, to reach as many pupils as possible, including calling them up, and some schools buying them mobile phones so we can keep in touch.
Okay, thanks. Again.
Did you hear me there? No, I'm on. Right, do you hear me now? I take it, yeah. We're happy to agree recommendations, and as part of the August report, we'll look at the cost of electricity where we're supplying equipment to young people. Okay?
Yeah, okay.
Good, right. That takes us on to item 5, Craig End Resource Centre. Gerard's going to speak to that. You're still on mute, Gerard. No, we can't hear you, Gerard. You're on mute, but we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now, Convener?
Yes, yes.
Sorry about that. I think it was to do with the microphone. My apologies again. Convener, to request the committee's approval for a minor alteration in the area of ground that's shown within the plan. The Craig End Resource Centre required this approval before the 30th of June, hence the urgency of this report. As you'll have known, Convener, there's been 2 previous reports in detail to the committee about this, the Environment Committee, in October 19 and in March 20. The area that's hatched in the plan is the monoblock area, and that was to be used for the play area. They would like to be swapped, Convener, so that the cross-hatched area be allocated for the play area instead, and the monoblock area would be the entrance. It's all been agreed with the officers, but does require the committee's approval. There are no financial consequences for this at all, Convener.
Okay, you'll be pleased to know Chris is quite happy to agree to this, and there's no questions. Everybody else happy to agree?
Yeah.
Okay, that's agreed. Okay, that takes us on to item 6, anti-slavery reparations request by myself. Gerard, you going to introduce this, and then I'll obviously speak to it. The committee agrees.
Thank you, Convener. In respect of this, we received last week correspondence from a Gourock resident relative to a crest that still appears at Gourock Pavilion. And on that point, the officers investigated the history of that and why that crest was there, and what replacements had previously been in place and why that crest had remained. Following upon that, there was a discussion with the CMT in terms of taking action to deal with that issue, and then we received, convener, your motion to review the Black Lives Matter campaign in relation to the disruption that was being felt elsewhere in terms of the campaign and the feelings that had arisen. It was a request, convener, that came in within the period of 7 days, and thus you are requesting, as I understand it, that this matter be considered as a matter of urgency because of those community concerns.
Okay, thanks, Gerard. I mean, I think the sort of request is fairly self-explanatory, and just before people set hairs running, and I know there's been some comment on social media about this, I'm certainly not talking about renaming streets or taking down statues. It is more about acknowledging the sort of role that our community played in the slave trade and aspects related to that, and educating our population. It's also about thinking about potentially ways in which we could atone for that in some way, which is very much a dark part of our history. And I'm entirely open-minded about how we do that. There's been some useful coverage in the last week or so, some very interesting articles, including a very interesting one I saw in the Greenock Telegraph last Thursday from one of our esteemed councillors who's been doing a bit of research on this. Some coverage in national papers, Professor Devine from the University of Edinburgh as well. And on Sunday night, there was the first part of a two-part documentary on the slave trade and Scotland's links to it on the BBC Scotland channel. And Greenock and Port Glasgow, Inverclyde featured heavily in that. Photographs of Gourock from the Lisle Hill, Greenock from Lisle Hill, people being interviewed in the tobacco warehouse and the sugar sheds, and very much outlining that we as a community in those days played a big part in the slave trade and the related industries. I think it's an important part of our heritage, in a sense, our history, that we've not acknowledged properly. I have received, and I'm sure other members have received, some representations in recent days from people who are encouraging us to look at this aspect of our history. There's a pretty imaginative project being developed by the Community Development Trust, and I think that's something that we could look as part of if we're following agreeing my request. It's certainly an area I think does need a bit of a light shined upon it. Other cities have shone a light on it, other areas, ports like Glasgow and Liverpool, and I think the time is probably long overdue that we looked at it. So I would certainly ask the committee to consider supporting my request. I've got a number of people that want to come in. Jim first, then Ronnie and Graham.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen, and thanks for your report as well. And there's no really additions to the report, because I think the report covers it. But what I would want to say is, slavery is not a thing that happened 200 years ago or 300 years ago. Slavery is a thing that's still going on today. So I think we've got to be very careful, and when we bring a paper back, we actually frame it also in its current context, that we know that people are getting traded throughout the world today, and there's slaves still in the streets of the United Kingdom today. So, agree with your paper, as long as when we do come back, there is some sort of acknowledgement that slavery isn't something that just happened 200-300 years ago. It's something that's still relevant today. So, providing that when we do that, there is some recognition that there's still that element of slavery that goes on in the United Kingdom and the streets of Scotland today, it's fine, maybe even a little. So providing we, as a living, actually let people know that is still happening today, then I'm in favour of that. The other comment I would make as well is sometimes we shouldn't take it upon ourselves, because I know if I look at myself and I look at my own family, I know we didn't benefit from the sugar trade. I know we didn't benefit from that. we would have been what we called wage slaves. So I recognise ourselves that there would have been people who benefited from that. But when I look back in my own family 200 years ago, I find a family that probably couldn't read or write. So again, I think it's one of these things that we've got to be careful not beat up ourselves too much about, but recognise that as a community, as Inverclyde, and as we know the West End, as we know our merchant traders did from that trade. And so providing we do take these things into, into I'm fine with that as well, Stephen.
Okay, thanks for that, Jim. Ronnie, Graham, and then Chris.
Thanks, Stephen. Just a very first quick question for Jerry Malone, if you don't mind. Jerry, you referred to the plaque on the Gourock Park Pavilion, one that I know very, very well. It's the original Gourock coat of arms. And I think before you had gone in to explain what the paper was about, you said what action, or you kind of said along the lines of that the CMP were considering taking some kind of action to address this. What sort of action were you considering in doing? That was my first question. And basically the second question, I think you've touched on it, Stephen, and I agree with you that Chris Martinelli's report that I read on social media or somewhere was absolutely excellent. But my point is that I think there are quite a lot of local experts on the slave trade. I've read numerous really, really first-class reports on all aspects of it. And I think those people who have contributed to that should really be consulted, if you like, when they're putting a report together. I'm not really convinced that we need to go externally to get a report on what we're looking for, because basically I guess the question is, what is it we're hoping to achieve here?
I mean, I'll bring Jerry in the specific question, Ronnie, but I don't think there is any intention to go externally. The documentary that I spoke about on BBC Scotland channel the other night, actually the Maclean Museum was acknowledged in the credits as being involved in that. And we have people locally who get a very active interest and knowledge of this area. So I think it's something that we'd be asking our officers to work with their own internal resources and local people in drawing on the sort of information, the archives we've got locally. I'm not talking about commissioning a consultant to look at this area. It's something I'd very much be expecting us to work, for example, with the Community Development Trust as well. Jerry, do you want to come in on the specific issue of the plaque?
Thank you, Convener. The representations we'd received was last week, and it was on the basis about the plaque that is on the pavilion in Gourock Park. And that plaque is a historical plaque. It's the Gourock Borough coat of arms, which in itself an amalgamation of the crests of the two families that are connected with Gourock, of course, the Darragh and the Stewart families. So in the basis of those concerns about the imagery on that crest, we're dealing with a suitable replacement. And this was, of course, concurrently with the discussions that are taking place today with the report that's being considered today, and in the spirit of that report. Obviously, we want to reflect the history of the borough of Gourock, but we also want to take into account the public concerns about the type of imagery, acceptable though it might have been in historical terms. And so we thought that a more suitable replacement could be put there, and we really wanted to determine the views of the council through the executive subcommittee today as to that action. But we would be making provision for the replacement of that coat of arms, Convener, unless otherwise instructed.
This is the Vodafone voicemail service for...
Oh, are we back?
Hello.
Are we back?
Convener, did you get?
What happened there, Alan? Do you know?
Convener, did you get me at all?
Yeah. Hold on a second. I just want to check with Alan what happened there.
Yeah, we're all back. We just dropped out for a second.
Okay. Right, Gerard, as you were saying.
Convener, did you hear what really I was saying there at all?
I didn't hear what you said at all, Gerard. No.
Oh, my apologies for that, convener.
It was all great remarks, so.
Yeah. Yeah.
Convener, what I was saying is that last week we received the complaint, concerns from a Gourock resident about the imagery that was on the crest at the pavilion in Gourock Park. That crest is, of course, the Gourock Borough crest. In the course of, I think, 8 or so years ago, there were some replacement crests put on certain buildings. I cannot tell you why, convener, there was no replacement on that building. The crest is the amalgamation, the historical amalgamation of the two families connected with Gourock, the Darroch family and the Stewart family. And it was thought that a replacement could be undertaken. But in view of the motion that was coming forward at today's committee, it was thought that we would have to determine the views of the council through the policy and exec subcommittee as to the course of action for that. It would be the officer's proposal to deal with a replacement to that crest if that were considered satisfactory, convener.
Okay. Ronnie, do you want to come back in on that?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Yeah, excuse me. I think that pavilion was actually opened anyway in 1956, and as far as I can recall, I'm not a old boy, I recall that plaque was there when the original pavilion was constructed. And I guess my question would be, how long was it, the official plaque of the old Gourock Town Council? You know, I don't think that we created that particular plaque, you know, customised it for that pavilion. My understanding was that was the coat of arms, if you like, of Gourock, going back for a considerable time. It's just a general question. I'm not particularly making any real point about it, but it's just a general question.
Gerard, you want to come on?
Convener, I can confirm Councillor Alfield is correct. It is the official borough crest. It has been registered as such. We have endeavoured to find out how long that has been in place, along with the actual narrative, the actual wording that goes along with the accreditation of the crest. We've not been able to find that out at all because that information is not yet available to us. I will certainly continue to research that point, and my colleagues are trying to do that as well, but it certainly was the official borough crest. But I don't know the actual dates for which that pertains, convener, and we have tried to find that out.
Stephen, just a very quick one. Have you read that one, Jerry?
No, convener, I haven't, but I look forward to getting a copy of that from Councillor Alfield.
It's Colin Milne's History of Gourock, published in 1958, the centenary of the borough. And I think if you read it, or McRae's History of Gourock, you'll find the answers.
That is a salutary bit of advice from Councillor Alfield, and I'm happy to take that as a Gourock resident, convener. Thank you.
Okay, so just on that narrow specific point, which is obviously separate to the main request, officers are looking from guidance to the committee as to whether we should replace that plaque with the more up-to-date version that is located in other public buildings.
Can I speak to that then?
Yes. Yeah, just to get Gerard, just to clarify, is that what you're looking for?
Effectively, no, convener, and I'm sorry to make that point. Officers will replace that plaque, and that's what I was saying. But given the fact that this is all something that's been taking place since Wednesday evening to today, I thought it was appropriate to await any final determination, just as Councillor Alfield is educating me about the history of Gourock and Colin Mills's book. But it wouldn't be officers' request. We would replace that plaque unless otherwise instructed.
Okay, right. Can you come in on that narrow point and I'll bring you in?
Well, yeah, I think on that narrow point kind of speaks volumes to the purpose of your report, because I think you're talking about the crest. It's amalgamation, as you say, to the Darroch coat of arms and the Shaw Stewart coat of arms, and it's Avant and Be Careful. Now, there's not a BAME member of the CMT, evidently. I would be more interested in actually hear from the lived experience of black people and coloured people, and if they think it's racist, then it's racist, because it doesn't matter if I think it's racist or not, because I'm a white person, and it's a motto of it's clearly someone that's looks to have come out of a shop with a knife that's black. So I think that the point of what Councillor McCabe's asking is to actually look at this sort of thing and then come back and see what sort of actions should be taken, whereas you're to an extent preempting an action by making a unilateral decision that you've determined that plaque, which has been up there for who knows how long, is racist. But I would like to hear the views of. I personally don't know. I mean, it's also on the football team badges, etc., as well as being in other parts of the town. You'll notice that the Provost's lamp post at the old Provost House in Marhill Road doesn't have that. They've got the alternative coat of arms, which I think is actually a nicer coat of arms. So I think that we should actually talk to people to see if they think that is something that's racist before the CMT come to a determination that is. It may well be. But you're to an extent not listening to the lived experiences of BAME members of our community, which is maybe what I think the convener was intending as part of the piece of work, was to actually see their views. Just moving on to the wider report.
Wait a minute, Chris. Okay, as long as Graham's happy for you to come in now, because Graham was in the list, so Graham's happy. So on you carry on. Yeah.
I just one point of clarity on what your question is. You're requesting that officers come back with ideas of community repatriations, and that's a kind of specific phrase that's almost always referring to financial or some other form of monetary exchange, whether it be land exchange or financial compensation. I don't imagine that you're proposing officers come back and make proposals for who we should be making financial compensations to. So
no. I mean, I think reparations can have a non-financial element to it, and as I say, I don't have any fixed views. I think a reparation is admitting and acknowledging that wrongs were done, and to a certain extent, I don't necessarily agree with Jim, because not about the modern slavery point, but the fact that his family never benefited. Well, specifically, his family might not have benefited. But one of the points of the TV programme the other night was that actually the slave trade and those trades related to it, sugar and tobacco, etc., brought wealth and jobs to the town that benefited the whole community. Benefited some more than others, but it benefited the whole community. But I mean, I could give us a specific example of a potential reparation. And don't forget that we're not the first to look at this. I mean, the University of Glasgow, for example, have done a lot of work in this. But I mean, we could, for example, sponsor a scholarship of some sorts to one of the universities to encourage research into this sort of area, or research into African and Caribbean studies or something like that. But as I say, I have no fixed view. I'm certainly not proposing the way some people have reacted on social media that we're going to be sending millions of pounds to Africa or the Caribbean. Clearly, that's no on.
Okay, I appreciate that clarity. I think that, I mean, I was already broadly supportive, but I think that it's just good to maybe get that on the record. I think I agree with you that I don't agree with changing the names of streets, because it's Greenock and Inverclyde's history through, for better or worse, regardless of whether you like it or not. I was going to say that we're perhaps in the advantageous position that we don't really have controversial statues that we need to fixate a debate on, but obviously the plaque at Gourock perhaps now proves that that's not quite the case. I think we should be broadly aiming in a direction that the outcomes we want to achieve from what you're asking for is that there's an educational experience, so that people can have an ongoing experience, whether it's through schools or through community initiatives that reflect on the past. Some form of monument along the lines of the one Councillor Clotterty was involved in with 1820 martyrs. So there's an actual fixed asset that whatever the form of words is, and whatever it's commissioned, whatever it looks like. And I think there's got to be an ongoing experience, whether that's utilising the Maclean Museum. In the future, it could be the Wiley Museum, the Beacon, and also in our schools. And I think the final point was that members may be interested, considering the they liked the article in the Greenock Telegraph that Councillor Brennan and I have a cross-party philosophical club. And Councillor Brennan had emailed me to say that he likes the mention quote, it's the job of the journalist is to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. And I think as white privileged people, then that is the whole point here, is we need to challenge ourselves to confront uncomfortable truths. And just one final point on, I did agree with what Councillor Clotty was saying, but I don't think we should get into a competition of demands. Modern day slavery, whether it's people that are sex trafficked or brought to this country, I think we need to accept that impinges on the lived experience of black people, and both are completely wrong. But if we expand this to an extent, it might lose focus that what I think this exercise should be about is reflecting on Inverclyde's historic link to the transatlantic slave industry and how we can address that. There's obviously modern day issues that don't just impact Inverclyde, and perhaps we should maybe look to have a bit of information sharing with Glasgow City Council, because they'd already commissioned on the back of some of those David Heyman documentaries. It was one of their councillors, Graham Campbell, that was involved in them. They've already commissioned quite a substantial body of work that I think they're well underway with. So although we maybe be wanting to look into the specifics of our own history, the broad themes, I would imagine, will be covered in that commission piece of work that they've paid for in conjunction with Glasgow University.
Absolutely. I mean, I think I would agree with practically everything you've said there. I think we should draw on all those pieces of research, and I think it should be about education, and that's why it's pretty broad. But I mean, in terms of tying in with the point about modern slavery, it does talk about the sort of recognising the connection in today's society, and I think it is important that we learn lessons from the past and highlight the fact that slavery still exists. I don't necessarily say that'll be a huge part of whatever work is done, but it certainly should be considered. Okay, I've got Graham next.
Thanks very much, convener. First, apologies. My laptop is dying. The screen there is dying where the camera is. So I'm now looking, so it maybe looks silly. I'm looking at my main screen in the office because Alan needs to fix my computer again. My point was, it was on the back of what Jim's comments were, that 14 months ago, I brought to the attention of Council that at our first meeting on May 2017, we engaged with Inverclyde Fair Trade Steering Group, but yet we'd never turned up at it. We being the Council, never turned up at it. I believe it was an action point, but nothing has happened since. And one of the issues that we have about continuous challenges overseas is we can actually make a difference through the fair trade issue, through choosing to use our commerce on a fair trade basis. But as a council, I would suggest we are failing to do that, even though we've signed up to a piece of paper. So it was to reiterate that 14 months ago, we agreed that we were going to do something about our non-action in fair trade. 14 months later, we're now doing nothing still.
I mean, I'm happy for us, Graham, to ask officers to give us an update report on fair trade and what we're doing to promote fair trade. So I'm sure we can agree that. Ronnie, you want to come in again?
His quest, but I'm looking at the story of Gourock's coat of arms. It's published by a guy called James Tomlinson. It was printed in the Gourock Times in 1963. It says that the arms of the town were registered by the Lord Lion on the 1st of December 1954. But the interesting thing is that the previous coat of arms was used in the town between 1892 and 1954. And I'm actually looking at it just now, and it would appear to me that any of the problem connotations we have with the current one are not on that one. So it might just be worth having a wee look at that. But you made a point, convener. Maybe there's an argument here that says, let the kids have a look at it and perhaps design something that everyone agrees with.
Okay, any other comments? Right, so are we generally agreed on my request? And can we include in that a sort of see what the connections to modern slavery are? Can we also agree that we're going to get a follow-up report on fair trade separately from that. And the other issue is the controversial issue of the old style Gourock coat of arms. Gerard, do you want to come in on that?
Convener, that was the very much the valuable discussion from today. I would be proposing to replace that with Councillor Alfeld's recommended 1892-54 version, or some such other crest as we can locate. Convener, if that would be satisfactory to deal with that aspect.
Yeah, sorry, Convener, just a point on that. Now, I know this wasn't the point of your debate, but if you think about a year ago, we obviously did a debate on an unincorporated street, and we decided to call it Virginia Street against a couple of different proposals. We're in the same position here now, that although Councillor Alfeld's proposed motto may not be a visual display of what people think are racist, we're proposing to just again put up a motto in our town that pays homage and honour to the Shaw Stewarts and the Darrocks, and arguably the latter were involved in the slave trade, and almost certainly the former were involved in the slave trade. So we're seeing across the world people have taken issues with statues of Coulson and Peel, and we're proposing putting up a plaque which is a motto which honours someone who was fundamentally 100% a slave trader, and another family who perhaps have dubious connections to the trade as well. So I think there's a broader piece of work than just taking down a plaque that you don't like the look of it and replacing it with one that fundamentally, in terms of the social injustice structures and the families that were involved in the slave trade, it just honours them in a more glossed up version.
A local historian did say to me that he noticed that your article featured only Greenock and ignored Gourock as well.
But it actually featured Port Glasgow, Maxwell Street, of course. I did send a longer version in the Greenock Telegraph. Must have just not been able to include the bit about Gourock in it.
It's only 500 words. Ronnie, you want to come back in?
Just very quick. I've no issue with that whatsoever. I mean, I'm just making a suggestion, and if I can help at all, then so be it. I'm not saying let's use the previous version, for example. I'm saying let's consider it. That's it.
Well, could we agree to take the offending one down and not replace it with anything at this point in time until we've explored that particular issue?
Well, again, I don't have any issue with that.
I think you've proposed a really good paper, and I would have maybe liked to have this conversation offline, because I don't think it's beneficial to fixate on it. But we've seen ridiculous scenes, obviously, in Glasgow, with people just turning up to defend a statue of Peel. I think that this is something that it's beneficial to do things with a community instead of doing them to them. I think it would be worthwhile speaking to Gourock Community Council and even Cardwell Bay Community Council, local representatives, and actually taking it down for the sake of something, not taking it down because someone's complained. As I said earlier on, I think we should be speaking to people with lived experience and people that are actually of colour and black people to ask them, do they think it's racist? Because, as I said, if they tell me it's racist, then I accept that they think it's racist because I'm a white man. Whereas I just don't think that we should be doing things to a community without actually involving people in it. And
okay, there is the danger this particular issue is hijacking the overall purpose of my request. So I'm happy for consultation to take place with the local community and local elected members, and then a decision is made on the back of that, rather than us getting involved in making a decision today on that. But in terms of the generality of my request, we're happy to agree that.
Yep.
Yes, I agree with that.
Okay. Right. That takes us to the end of public business. So I have to ask, unfortunately, David, you need to leave us, but thank you for being there.
Thank you.
Cheers.